Welcome to another episode of Will It Game. Awesome entrance aside, on today's episode we have a special 2-for-1 offer. 2-for-none offer, since this is free content actually. We have the GTX 750 Ti going up against the GTX 950. Unfortunately, the 950 that I use for benchmarking is in use right now and is not available to physically go head-to-head with the 750 Ti, but I have a smorgasbord of other video cards on display here. All of these either have already or will be used in future videos. The GTX 590 you might recognize sitting here. We also have things such as the original GTX Titan. We have a GTX 770. We have a HD 7970. We have the mighty HD 7990. I don't know if many of you have even seen one of these before. This is one of the biggest video cards ever produced as far as physical size, power requirements, all of the above. 3 8-pin power connectors on this thing. I'm excited to see how this thing stands up today. So it's been pointed out in the 590 video that I need to do a better job of laying out how this is going to go. So basically what we're going to do, the start of the video, I'm going to go over the card or cards in question, the basic specifications, price point, and so on and so forth. The second part of the video will be the benchmarks. I'll have each benchmark will be left on the screen for about 5 seconds. You can pause at any point if you want to take a closer look at the benchmarks. And then after the benchmarks, we'll come back for my concluding thoughts and anything else that we need to go over. As I said, today's episode is a 2-for-1. You're going to get the GTX 750 Ti against the, I'd like to point to it, but it's not here, GTX 950. The 750 Ti was released on February 18th, 2014. Whereas the GTX 950 was released on August 20th, 2015. So a little over a year, almost a year and a half, in fact, separates these two cards. The 750 Ti was the first of NVIDIA's cards released on the Maxwell architecture, which was NVIDIA's return to power efficiency. Or I guess actually it was their first foray into power efficiency over raw power, raw die size. Video cards had been getting very hot and heavy, high power requirements for a long time, and NVIDIA thought it was time to go the way of Intel when they finally gave up the Prescott ghost. If you remember back in the Intel versus AMD days, previous to Ryzen, before AMD dropped off, Intel kept making their processors faster and faster, which made them hotter and hotter, and also required more and more power. So that was not working. AMD had a huge IPC, which is instructions per clock, advantage over Intel at the time, which means that regardless of whether an Intel processor was faster than an AMD processor could do more each instruction cycle than an Intel processor could. So what Intel did is they went back to the drawing board and they actually brought in their team that created the Dothan cores, which were used on the Centrino processors used in laptops, which were very efficient but very low-speed processors. And they said, we need to take this team and we need to make a desktop processor that is much more efficient. So NVIDIA did the same sort of thing. They said, these GPUs are getting too hot, they're getting too power hungry. We can't keep going down this road. So we need a complete redesign that's going to allow us to move forward in the future. There was not enough headroom left in their old architecture. So in comes the 750 Ti, which is kind of a sneak peek into the Maxwell architecture. It was a very cut down version of the Maxwell chip, but it was amazingly power efficient compared to every other card of the time. Crazy. This was one of the first mainstream mid-range graphics cards that could be powered using only the motherboard's PCIe slot. This card actually does have one 6-pin PCIe connector because it is an aftermarket OEM card. It's made by Asus and it's their DirectQ2. However, the 750 Ti does not require that 6-pin power connector. It is perfectly happy running off only the 75 watts provided by the motherboard. So that meant when it came out, it was great for OEM builders, people like Dell, HP. You could drop in a very cheap and easy 750 Ti into your computer. You bought a Dell. It came with a nice processor but had no dedicated graphics. You want to upgrade that system, make it more compatible with gaming. You drop in a 750 Ti, even if the machine doesn't have a 6-pin PCIe power connector, you're fine. It doesn't need one. The 750 Ti will run all day without it, and it'll do great. And it was quite a performance boost at the time, and still is, honestly, one of the better performance boosts you can do for a system if you don't have a PCIe power connector. The Maxwell architecture matured, and a year and a half later comes the GTX 750. Now, both of these cards are pointed at roughly the same segment of the market. If you're looking at today's prices on markets like eBay, Craigslist, whatever your local used PC market is, you're looking between 70 to 100 US dollars for each of these cards. Now, the 950 does have a much more volatile market for some reason, especially in regards to eBay. 2 or 3 weeks ago, there were plenty of 950s available on eBay, all in the 70 to 90 US dollar range. You look today, and there's almost no 950s available, and the ones that are available are in the $150+ range. You can get 960s for cheaper than that, and there is absolutely no reason you would ever go with a 950 over a 960. So the question then is, can the 750 Ti stand up to the 950? And if it can, is it a worthy buy at their respective price points? And I'm going to go off the assumption that the pricing on the 950 is going to level back out and come back down to the $70 to $90 range. If it stays in the 150+ range, I would not recommend it ever, no matter what. So specification-wise, the 750 Ti comes in stock with 640 CUDA cores, whereas the 950 comes in with 768 CUDA cores. So that's a clear advantage for the 950. The 750 Ti has a 1020 megahertz core clock with a boost clock of 10,000. Sorry, not 10,000. That would be very impressive. 1,085 megahertz boost clock, whereas the 950 has a 1,024 megahertz base clock with a boost clock of 1,188 megahertz. So that's another significant advantage for the 950. Both of these cards use 2 gigabytes of GDDR5, although you can get the 950 in 4 gigabyte variations. And if you are looking at a 950 or any card in general, these days I would recommend 4 gigabytes whenever possible. The days of 2 gigabytes of video RAM being enough for modern games are gone, basically. If you want to enable anything more than low settings at 1080p and higher resolutions, you're going to need at least 4 gigs of VRAM. So, but both of the cards in question today come with 2 gigs of VRAM. They both have a 128-bit memory bus. The memory clock on the 750 Ti is 5.4 gigabits per second, whereas on the 950 it is 6.6 gigabits per second. So, the 950 basically beats the 750 Ti in every hardware category. So, can the 750 Ti stand against it? And if it can, is it worth the buy? So, on the benchmark side today, we have a combination of synthetic and real-world benchmarks. On the synthetic side, we're using Unigen's Heaven, Valley, and their new Superposition benchmark. And we're also using 3D Mark's Firestrike and their newer Time Spy benchmark. On the real-world side, we have Tomb Raider from 2013, and then the 2015 sequel to Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider, which is a very graphically intense, semi-open world action RPG kind of thing. We also have 2013 Shadow of Mordor, followed up by its 2017 sequel, Middle-earth Shadow of War, which is a very graphically intense open world RPG hack and slash, Arkham-style combat video game. Finally, rounding out the real-world benchmarks, we have Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands, a 2017 release, open world, third-person shooter, very graphically intense, will really bring these cards to their knees at its highest settings. Hey guys, just wanted to jump in real quick. I'm actually recording this a little later after recording the 750 versus 950 live video portions. I forgot to go over the overclocking of both of these cards, so I did want to go over how these cards fared overclocking wise. Both cards were pretty decent overclockers. The 750 Ti is a significantly better overclocker than the 950 though. I do have 3 of the 750 Ti's on hand. I tested all of them. They all had pretty similar numbers overclocking wise. I only have the one 950 on hand, so I'm not able to say for certain that the chip itself is a bad overclocker. I could have just gotten unlucky in the Silicon lottery. So for the 750 Ti, I have the 2 of the Direct Q2 versions and 1 MSI WindForce version of the 750 Ti. The Direct Q2 out of the box has 1072 megahertz base clock on the core and a 1350 megahertz memory clock, whereas the 950 had a 1152 base clock on the core and a 1653 memory clock. On the 750 Ti, I was able to hit 220 megahertz increase on the core, which is a crazy fast increase for your average video card. I also hit 550 megahertz on the memory before seeing any artifacting at all. And for artifacting, I use an old school tool called ATI tool that draws a really fuzzy cube and it's easy to pick out artifacts in it. It also scans for artifacts itself. And then I also use just regular benchmarks and look for artifacts by eye. And then the 950 was able to hit 115 megahertz on the core and plus 500 megahertz on the RAM. So both cards pretty similar RAM numbers. Obviously, the 950 starts at a higher clock on the RAM than the 750 Ti does. So the 750 Ti's 50 megahertz overclock advantage is negated by the 950's almost 300 megahertz, actually a little over 300 megahertz clock advantage at base on the RAM. So core-wise, the 750 Ti actually comes up right into line with the 950 at around the same core speed when both cards are overclocked because of the extra 100 megahertz advantage it has in its overclock. Both cards performed quite a bit better when overclocked, and I would recommend overclocking either card if that's something you're comfortable with, because you will see pretty significant performance improvements once they are overclocked. The 750 Ti, one thing you might want to consider doing is doing a BIOS mod on it. The default BIOS that most of the 750 Ti's come with does not take advantage of the 6-pin PCIe power connector. So if you do get a 750 Ti that has one, you might want to modify the BIOS to unlock the extra power available. For instance, my card was set at around 35 to 60 watts maximum power draw, which is what's available through the PCIe port itself. And if you bump that up to around 100 watts to 120, 130 watts, then you're pulling what's available through the 6-pin PCIe power connector as well. One thing to note though, I did not see significantly better overclocks when doing that. I only got 15 to 20 megahertz better on the core and no better RAM overclocks, obviously because RAM is not power limited, it's speed limited. That's something to consider. You may also want to consider doing a BIOS mod and setting the overclocked clocks to be your base clock, because there's no reason to run this thing at the slower clocks. Especially the DirectQ2 versions, the WindForce, the ACX coolers, all those are fully capable of running the cards 24/7 at the clocks mentioned earlier, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. If you want to see a video going over how to do BIOS mods on the cards, I'd be happy to do that. Drop me a comment down below and let me know if that's something you'd like to see. I'm very familiar with it. I've been doing BIOS mods on video cards since way back in the ATI, I almost said AMD there, but yes, it was ATI 7200 PCIe version that I overclocked to 550 megahertz on the core from its stock of 100 megahertz, and did a BIOS mod on it, an overvolt mod, and then superglued a CPU heatsink to it in order to keep the temperatures under control. So I've been doing hardware and BIOS modding for quite some time now. So if that's something you want to see, let me know. Drop me a comment and tell me if there's anything else you want to see also. So with the overclocking section done, we'll move on to the benchmarks, and then I'll see you back here for my conclusions afterwards. Thanks. And we're back. So as you can see from the benchmarks, there's really no scenario where the 750 Ti can keep up with the 950. I keep looking for the 950. It's not here. As I said, it's actually in use right now, so I can't physically point to it. But if it were here, it would be sitting here. So like I said, the 950 beats the 750 Ti in basically every scenario. I don't even need to qualify that. In every scenario, the 950 beats the 750 Ti. The only scenario where you might consider the 750 Ti over the 950 is if your system does not have a 6-pin PCIe power connector. There are 950s on the market that don't require the 6-pin connector, but they are pretty few and far between and more expensive than their PCIe power connector cousins. So if you do have a system, an OEM system that doesn't have that 6-pin connector, and you want a very significant upgrade over onboard graphics, even even 8th gen Intel onboard graphics or AMD A10 style, AMD APU style onboard graphics. The 750 Ti is a very good buy. Even today, especially at the $70 to $90 US dollar price point. What you do want to watch out for, though, there are eBay listings for 750 Ti's and 950s from China in the $50 range. Those are not 950s or 750 Ti's. Those are actually GTX 750 Ti's. They are mislabeled. They are purposefully, in my opinion, purposefully mislabeled by the seller in order to sell more of those units. So I would stay far away from them. And you can actually tell they, for some reason, even though they're clearly trying to trick people into buying GPUs that aren't the ones they're selling, they put GPU-Z screenshots in the listing. And the screenshots clearly show, they do show, you know, for instance, it'll say 750 Ti, but if you look at the actual specifications, it has much fewer CUDA cores, core clock, and memory clock than it should for a 750 Ti. So again, stay far away from those. Make sure you get real 750s and 950s if that's what you're going for. So like I said in conclusion, the 950 is the way to go. Now, if this weird price point for the 950 stays in place where the 960 is actually the cheaper option, I would, and you can't spring for the 960, I would go for the 750 Ti in this roundup. Also keep in mind, I have several other cards here that are going to be close to that price point that I haven't benchmarked yet. Cards like the 770 is in that similar price vein, around $100 US. If you're really watching eBay and you're playing the markets right, you can get the 770 for around $100 US. I expect the 770 to handily crush the 750 Ti and the 950. The 770, while it is an older gen card than the 950, it does have the full 256-bit memory interface, a much more unlocked version of its core, more CUDA cores to play with, so on and so forth. So keep watching. I will do a video with all the benchmarks lined up against each other so you can get an idea of how all these cards are going to compare against one another. I may start doing that in this video, actually. Include the 590 in there along with the 750 Ti and the 950. That way you can really get a feel of how these cards are coming in against one another. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, make sure to drop them down below. If there's anything you'd like to see, make sure to drop that down below and let me know. If there's any problems with the video, anything you noticed that I messed up, did wrong, anything like that, also drop it down below and I'll make sure to correct it, if not in this video, obviously since I'm recording it right now, in the next one. Make sure to subscribe. You'll get notifications for when all my new videos come out. I will be doing 1 to 2 of these Will It Game videos per week until I run out of cards to review. I've been working with computer hardware for 15 plus years now. It's something I enjoy doing, so if you have any suggestions, make sure to also drop those down in the comments. Anything you want to see, I'll be happy to take a look at it. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.